Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Suzanne Yatim Oslam. Suzanne is a former actor and former Miss Arab USA turned writer. She hit #1 bestseller with her new book. It's called Postpartum Me, a dark comedy addressing postpartum depression and anxiety. The book offers support and comfort to struggling moms, sharing an honest account of the author's experience. So I want to just kind of go behind the scenes on her experience writing the book, publishing the book. Hopefully this will be a really fun episode for moms who are thinking about writing a book, or maybe women who are going through postpartum. So Suzanne, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Well, I guess first off, you've got a past life and a bunch of different things, acting, modeling, speaking, it looks like a lot of experience speaking to kids as well. Yes. So why write this book? Like how does the book kind of fit in with where you're going, brand, business, that sort of thing?
The book had nothing to do with any of my past lives. This was a whole new life. Because I was at home with my kids. I couldn't act anymore. That was really hard for me. I needed to be creative and I wasn't. And I was just coming out of my postpartum depression. And funny enough, I know you guys know Hal Elrod a little bit.
Yeah.
I had just read his book called The Miracle Morning. And some of the stuff that in the book, you have this series of things that you do in the morning. And one of them is visualization. So I started visualizing what my life was going to look like and what I wanted. And I was, again, just coming out of my postpartum depression. And I was really angry that I was dealing with that. I had dealt with that and I felt so alone. And all the dark thoughts that I had were thoughts that when I said them out loud, they were not well received. And people kind of shied away and it wasn't good. So then I bottled it all up. So when I was doing my visualization, I started seeing myself writing this book so I could help other moms and say all the things that were in my head that I'm not special, that they most likely felt too, that I'm not the only person in the world that has felt this way, and just give them a voice. And so I just started visualizing writing this book and speaking about it. And I didn't know how it was going to turn out. Of course, when you write your first draft, my first draft was 30 pages. And I was like, I don't know what else to say, and by the time it was done, it was a series of journal entries, which means I get to let the mom inside of my brain. I just made these up because I wanted something creative. So you go inside of my head in these journal entries. It's really unfiltered. It's funny. It's dark. It's awkward, because you're just like saying things that you're not supposed to say to anybody else.
So, I feel like a lot of different kind of pieces to unpack there. I guess first off, you keyed on like, hey, I couldn't act anymore. Or at least for the time being, kind of right after having kids, and needed a creative outlet. What was, in your experience, what were some of the biggest differences in the mechanism of creativity between those two outlets, I guess the writing and the acting?
Yeah.
And then, let's start there. And I got one other question kind of on that thing. Yeah.
So what I love about writing is I love acting more than anything, really. Like if I could pick one, I'd rather be an actor. But acting is a village project. It's a group project. And I have to rely on so many other people to do this. I need the script to be good, assuming I can get a script, assuming I get cast, assuming I work well with the director, assuming the how many movies I made that have never seen the light of day. I mean, it just happens. So but I can sit there in my room and be in my own little world, which is why I love acting, because I love, turning into somebody else, going into a whole different world. That's why I love reading. So I get to write and I get to have full control of what that looks like and how I do it. And I don't have to wait for anybody and rely on anybody. It's why I didn't even do the traditional publishing route, because I, again, didn't want to wait for my agent to get me a job like I did with acting. So yeah, that's what I loved about it.
And what would be maybe your advice for other people who, because I feel like your experience is probably not uncommon in the sense of like people who had previously had some sort of different creative outlet and then now are turning to writing or maybe even writing their first book as that outlet. I guess what would be your advice for people who are kind of in that mode and then thinking about writing their first book?
I would use your past life to propel you into this. So for example, I really like dialogue because I like acting and I like a really compelling story. So in my journal entries, it's not me just saying, and then yesterday I went here. No, I actually have dialogue that I wrote, that I made up between me and my husband, for example. And the stories are real, but I don't remember exactly what was said 3 years ago. So I used my love for acting and script writing and all that to create the dialogue, which for me was so fun. So I was able to use my love for my former life and I tied it into my writing.
Cool. And did you ever write scripts or did you just act with existing scripts?
That was our creative pastime, me and my husband. We'd hang out at night before we had children and we would write scripts together. It's so much fun. And I realized I'm really good at dialogue.
And so, tell me more about that. I feel like this is something I get asked about all the time that I just have no real context on. I've had a couple of people on the podcast talking about script writing. It's funny seeing the commonalities of, Stephen Pressfield came on the podcast and he wrote scripts early on and then ended up writing books. And we had, I feel like 2 or 3 different authors have done that. And then we had a whole episode with a woman who kind of took her experience and says, all right, here's how you turn your book into a script. But what would you say, Suzanne, is your personal experience? Like, what did you learn writing scripts that made you better writing books? What are kind of some of the similarities and differences?
Script writing is way easier.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. Because you just get to go, he walked into the room and grabbed the newspaper. That's it. I don't have to tell you what he was wearing or what he looked like. And then he grabbed his coffee cup and all that like extraneous stuff that you need to make 300 pages of a novel. You don't need it. So it's just easier. It's mostly dialogue and a little bit of exposition. So in terms of like right now I'm writing a second book and it's in the form of a novel. And I'm like, what did I get myself into? This is so hard. Because I'm used to, in the journal entries, I just got to like free flow. And then before in script writing, it was all dialogue driven. So writing like a legit novel is actually, I bit off a lot.
Yeah, it's really hard. You should check out some of our fiction training. Rami and the team, we got a whole fiction side of the business, but we always joke and they always joke that real authors write fiction.
Yeah.
It's so much harder.
It's so true.
I know you haven't finished the fiction book yet, but what's been your experience and the differences between writing nonfiction and fiction?
It's so interesting because I wish I could show you. On the floor, I have this giant piece of paper with this arc. I went to a writing retreat and then I've got like all these Post-it notes of all these different ideas. So I've got chapters in my head, but the chapters are really small. It's like, okay, so she went to Petra in Jordan. And I'm like, right, that's a really cool story because it's a really cool scene. I'm like, but what do I do with that? Like, how do you flesh it out? And how do you actually make like a whole chapter out of it when I just have like one thought to say? Do you know what I mean? This was my problem in college. They'd be like, write an 8-page paper. And I'm like, but I can say it in 3. So why do I need pages? You know? So that's been like a really big struggle to me. So Rami's right.
Yeah. Real authors write fiction. So what, talk to me a little bit more about the script writing side of things. And is there anything that you feel like you learned from writing scripts that helped you become a better author?
Oh man, that's such a good question.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement.
Well, again, because I'm really into dialogue driven stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's really fun for me to see how, okay, so when you're reading a script as an actor, you go through every single line and you kind of notate like, okay, what do they really mean when they're saying this? What's the actual, like, what's your purpose? Every scene you go into, you have to ask yourself, what does this character want from this scene? So the dialogue is like, it's like almost surfacey because what you're actually feeling and thinking and wanting and the drive is kind of different. That's just the tool to get you there. Do you know what I mean? Because very rarely do we actually like go out and say what we really want, right? We have to cover it up and make it pretty. So it was really cool to see, okay, so that's the idea in my head is every single line that you say actually has a deeper meaning. So how do you take that and then put it into book form where, for example, myself, when I'm dealing with postpartum depression and in the story, like I didn't know I had it. And then when I did know I had it, I didn't tell my husband. So I'm talking to him knowing I have postpartum depression, but I'm not telling him. And every single line is shrouded with like this information that he doesn't have. And so there's just so many more layers to the dialogue. And had I not had that background with acting and script writing and really like being forced to dive into what every single line means, what did the script writer want and mean when he said that? And how do I interpret it? All of it helped me write dialogue better.
That's really interesting. It kind of ties in with the famous quote or saying around like whatever it is, that 30% of what you say is the actual words, or 30% of what's communicated is the actual words that you say. And it's interesting hearing that the other side of breaking down the script as an actor or actress and saying, okay, this 30% of what I'm reading is what's being said. Now, how do I fill in the other 70% with the emotions, the expressions, the way that I'm saying it?
Exactly. It's a hard job.
So you keep using this phrase of, hey, writing dialogue, and I'm really good at writing dialogue and all this stuff. Let's unpack that for somebody who's like, hold up, what is dialogue? And then how do you get good at it? I know it sounds like this is a learned skill, but any tips for folks who are like, hey, I'm writing about my life story and I'm struggling with the dialogue aspect?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if it's just because I talk good. or what, but what I noticed that what makes me, and I feel weird saying, oh, I'm such a good writer with dialogue, but I think what makes me really good at it is I, as a writer, this, you watch people, creepily so sometimes, like you just watch and you analyze how they talk. And so I've gotten good at, if I write something and then I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's no way anybody says this. That's just not how people talk. This is me forcing it because I'm trying to get a point across. So I just got really used to observing people and seeing how they really talk and understanding what's real and what's forced.
And then I guess beyond that, how do you, how do you get better at it? I mean, obviously you've done it a lot, but what would be your tips for someone who says, hey, I've got 10 pages of dialogue and it sucks. Like, how do I make it better?
Oh my God. I think probably the best bet is to, most of the time when we're writing characters, we're writing them loosely based even off of people we know, like, oh, my grandfather's got a really bad temper. So this character, I'm just going to use like what I know from my grandpa. So then you got to ask your question, like, would your grandpa talk this way? Was this how he express himself? So I think I would just sit there and try to observe people more and just see again, because if you're forcing it, you're going to tell. Like, you ever watched a movie where you're like, nobody talks that way. That's because they're forcing it in order to get you from point A to point B. And if you're doing that, that's why I like the way that I wrote it in the book, because it's very free flow and it just sounds like two people chatting. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And I think what you're alluding to is maybe a good thing to double click in for people is if you're writing whether it's self-help, whether it's memoir, whatever, but about yourself, you are a character. You're the main character. Yes. And it feels weird to write about yourself as a character, or sometimes people just don't even connect the dots. It's like, well, hey, I'm just sharing my experience, but you're still a character. And so you should approach that character development, that dialogue, all those pieces in the same way as if you were writing about someone else. And that's why, oftentimes we'll talk about how we get our memoir authors that come in to work with us, and we put them in our fiction program, and they're like, well, hold up, I'm writing a memoir. It's like, well, a memoir is much often more closely resembles fiction writing than it does nonfiction writing, because you're telling a story. You have characters, you have dialogue, you have all these kind of core elements that would normally exist inside of fiction.
Yeah. Whenever I'm filling out stuff online for, like I'm submitting my book or whatever, I'm always under like nonfiction and biography. And I hate that because I don't feel like it's a nonfiction. It doesn't read that way to me.
Oh, interesting. What, we've talked about this a little bit, but what would you say was the toughest part of the writing and publishing process as a first-time author?
The publishing process. The writing was like, I thought that was hard. And then I started doing the like, okay, what do I do now? I have words. And then I would write it all over again if I never had to ever like try the publishing part of it again. That was hard. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't know anything. So I just did it on my own. I started Googling like, how do you publish a book by yourself? And then before I did that, I started looking up book agents. And that was so depressing. And I realized like, oh, I'm just doing the thing I did before with acting, where I was like, hey, I really hope my agent gets me this audition. Hey, I really hope my agent gets me in front of this publisher. So I was like, I'm just going to take this into my own hands instead of, fingers crossed. So I did it that way. And I just started I just started Googling. I started going on blogs, and people would be like, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then I would like take their steps and their steps and their steps and your steps. And I just like, I had nobody to hold my hand. So I just kind of half-assed it really, which is why I did a relaunch this year, because I didn't know.
And so I guess maybe 2-part question, follow up on that. Any tips or lesson learned from navigating the publishing process, knowing what you know now, that might be helpful for folks?
It really helped to know the differences. And I know this is so basic and it might seem obvious to you guys, but the difference in editing, like developmental editing and line editing and copy editing, I didn't know that was a thing. I learned about like putting it away, printing it out, putting it away, not even looking at it. And then when you do, who did I learn it from? Neil Gaiman. I watched his masterclass. He's so smart. And I printed it out, and there was something about holding your book, first of all, that just energizes you. And you're like, oh my God. And then I sat there and I looked through it myself with a pen and the paper. And there was something about that was really helpful after spending a year looking at it on a screen. So I really loved that. And so the process of just learning how the editing world works, that was really, really good to know. Really, really good to know. Like you get a developmental editor and then they change your story and you're like, that's not, oh no, that's better. That's
that's cool. It's funny because it's almost like the way you're describing it was probably a little bit nostalgic to how you would do scripts. Is having them actually printed out, writing it up, stuff like that. Do you think that's what some of the similarities were, or why that felt familiar or maybe energizing again, or no?
I never thought about it that way, but yeah, to your point, I've never looked at a script on a screen before. It was always on paper.
Oh,
I never thought about that, but yeah, because you have to highlight and you have to circle and you have to make your little notes like, oh, what's her intention behind the scene? And, and all that's happening. And then you walk around your house with it, performing the scene. And so paper.
Nice. You talked about relaunching the book this year.
Yeah.
This is something we talk about and teach all the time, is this concept of a relaunch. And it almost feels like one of those things that you just teach all the time, but then nobody ever does it. And I think so many people, almost everyone, should relaunch their book at some point.
Really?
I think so. Yeah. And so why did you relaunch? How did you relaunch? And any lessons learned from that?
Okay, I'm so curious why you tell people to relaunch. Can I ask you that first?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think so I talk about, in my book published, it's, there's basically the whole, I've launched now, like now what?
Right.
And so many authors go through that. And whether a lot of people, their launch didn't do as well as they thought originally. So they think they need to relaunch, or you just want to pour gas on the fire and have an excuse to talk about the book again. So I kind of talk about the 5 different types of relaunches. There's the just because relaunch, there's updated and expanded edition, there's new and revised, there's anniversary, and there's one other that I can't remember right now. But kind of like or I think maybe multiple formats, like launching the ebook and then launching print and then launching audiobook, and treating that as a separate launch, and to kind of have multiple bites of the apple. So those are like the types, and then why I recommend it and why we teach it and recommend it. What's your take?
Okay. So I put out my book in December 2022, like just kind of on a whim. I'm like, okay, I think we're good. It was on Amazon, like publish, great. And then I went online on social media and I was like, hey guys, I wrote a book. Okay. And that was kind of it. There was no leading up to it. Nobody had a clue. And I would talk about it every once in a while. I'm not very good at social media, and I did my best, and I had no plan at all. So a friend was like, you should relaunch your book. And I'm like, why? What's the point? To your point, those 5 points didn't occur to me. And she was like, just do a second edition and that'll give you a reason to relaunch the book. Well, I've been on this podcast tour where I talk about maternal mental health, and I've learned so much. So I went through the book and I edited it based on just all the new information that I've learned to just make it more holistic for the mom. And speaking of developmental editing, I sent it to an editor and she destroyed it because my book was in past tense because they're journal entries, right? She made it all in present tense. And I was so mad at her for doing this to me. And then I was like, oh, damn it. That's actually really good, because now you're like on the journey with me. You're experiencing all of my emotions in real time. And because it's so like, I say she when I'm talking about, to your point, like she's a character, my girl, I'm a character. Mm-hmm. So, mm-hmm. You're like watching her go through all these ups and downs. And so actually living it in real time, especially if you're a mom and you're feeling these things also in real time, was really helpful. So it ended up feeling like a new book, even though the story was exactly the same. It was just updated into present tense. I added a few more like mental health notes. And then I decided to make the audiobook based on that. So then I had 2 tracks. I had a second edition, and then I had the audiobook based on the second edition.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So when I relaunched, I hired a girl in New Jersey to do my social media. And so she started doing like countdowns to the book launch and, things like that. And then I had a big launch party, which felt weird to me because I'm like, the book's been out for a year. So why are we doing a launch party? But I just it felt really self-serving. So I really tried hard to get out of my comfort zone because I knew that the more publicity this book got, the more moms it helped. So we had this big launch party, and it was private. Like I didn't invite people online. I just had this party. Steve Sims flew out. It was so lovely. And I had it at an art gallery / bookstore, and like signed books. I didn't know I was going to do that. It was really weird. And the audiobook didn't come out the day of the launch like it was supposed to. So that actually worked out really well. So I had like the 5-day campaign on Amazon where the book was free. And so I got to focus all on the ebook, and I ended up selling for free. I had like 250 downloads just in that 5 days, which was really cool for me since I was a nobody. And then, so by the time the audiobook came out like a week later, because Amazon, they have that 10 business days. And I just had no idea when it was going to drop. So by the time that came out, there was already so much buzz with the ebook and the launch. And I was like posting pictures from the launch party and my speech from the party and the pictures of the cool people that came, all these influencers. It was so great. And so by the time the audiobook came out, like that just worked out really well. The timing, I didn't mean to do that. There was so much more hype that I got to then just keep, add the gas to that fire.
Yeah. And so you kind of got to promote the audiobook as if it was a new book that was launching and a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
Cool. Was there anything that you did specifically to the audiobook that you feel like worked well or moved copies or anything like that?
I did it myself because I figure it's my story and I'm an actor. Audio work is very difficult. So next time you listen to an audiobook, just know that person is amazing. It's so hard. Is there anything I did? It was just really interesting of finding the line of like making it interesting enough, engaging enough for it to not be monotonous, but at the same time, like I can't actually perform, I can't cry just because my character in that moment is crying. So just learning to do that and trying to be engaging enough was really, really hard. But one thing I did learn is not to go to print until after the audiobook is done, because I caught 29 mistakes.
Yeah. That's not uncommon.
No, it's not. And there's something about reading it out loud. I don't care how many times you've read it, but the second you read it out loud, you're going to catch stuff. So my audio engineer was like, hey, just heads up, don't print it yet. Just wait for me to do it with you and then go to print.
Oh, cool. That's smart. That's a great tip. It's funny. We recommend that people do the verbal read through as part of their editing process. But even with that, I mean, when I've recorded my audiobooks, I've caught a few mistakes. It almost just feels like this universal thing. Yeah. Even after I'd done the verbal read through, because, you're reading it, but you're not reading it in the same way that you're reading it when when you're performing your audiobook, which is just down to the word. And I feel like, you just catch a lot more that way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about kind of lessons learned from this process. And I want to kind of unpack this maybe for a couple different groups of people. So let's start with moms. We have a lot of moms in our world and gosh, probably 60-70% of the people who write books with us are women. So helping a lot of women and mostly moms, and a lot of times 40, 50, 60 year old range are coming to us to write books. So what would be your advice to moms who are thinking about writing books or kind of going through this process, kind of knowing what you know now?
I was, like I said at the beginning, like I'm not special. My story isn't unique, but I was really surprised by the amount of people that said, you could take out your name and put in mine, and that's my story. And so even though I felt like, well, you already know the story because it's your story, so I'm not telling you anything you don't know, the fact that it was put on paper and somebody gave voice to their feelings and their thoughts impacted them in a way that made them feel less alone. So they already knew, let's say, that they had postpartum depression. That's not enough. What helps them is knowing that, oh my God, like, thank you for giving me the words. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not crazy. Thank you for making me feel like I'm not alone. This is so great. You're right. I do need help. And then, going out and getting the help, which is the whole point of this. So you think like nobody wants to hear your story because either you think like it's too, who cares about you and your story? None of us are that unique that somebody's not going to resonate with it. And so many people don't put it into words. So having the capability of putting it into words and then connecting with people that way is you're giving them such a gift and making them feel like they're not isolated. So I really like that power.
That's really cool. I guess maybe similar vein, what for people who want to write books about difficult life experiences, I feel like this could be a whole separate podcast interview, but I feel like we've always said in some ways it's like free therapy because you're writing out kind of about some of the really tough times in your life. What would be your encouragement or advice there as someone who's written a book that feels very personal. And obviously, even the way that you did it, it's like journal entries, very raw and real and vulnerable. What did you learn from that? And what would be your advice for folks who are thinking about going down that same path?
So I'm not saying this is how you should do it. This is just how I did it. I made it a dark comedy on purpose because it's such a heavy topic. And if you're in the middle of postpartum and your life feels like it's unraveling and it's absolute garbage and you can't think straight and you're tired, you're sleep deprived. I wanted to make you laugh a little. I wanted to bring a little levity into your life. I already know your life is hard. Like we don't need to sit there and like cry all day together. Like you can do, that's important. And I don't want to take away from it with any levity, but sometimes I wanted to be the person to give you that levity. So I really like making people laugh. I really, really love it. So being able to, in that dark time, just make you chuckle a little bit with a joke that I have about Harry Potter or whatever it is that I say in the book. I just really love. So that was one of the goals that I had is, yes, I want to hold your hand and I want to give you the courage to ask for help, but I also really want to laugh along the way. So for me, that was the direction I chose to take. And I was very intentional with that direction. Like I knew it was going to have comedy in it. So maybe somebody's writing about something really serious and they can't do that and they want to just keep it serious. That's fine. But I think it really helps to know what your emotional goal is.
Oh, cool. Full circle.
Oh, I just made that up.
So your emotional goal, similar to the whole script writing piece at the very top of the interview.
Look at that, Chandler.
What's the words that you're saying and how do you want to make someone feel when they're reading this or when they're seeing this, depending on the mechanism of delivery, whether you're writing or acting it out. Yeah. So this has been awesome, Suzanne. I guess a couple final questions. First one would be, what's your parting piece of advice, knowing what you know now on the other side of this experience for the Suzanne from, a few years ago, or the other Suzannes out there who are thinking about writing or in the process of writing their first book?
Oh, my advice would be that humans are communal creatures and we need to connect with people. And if sharing your story allows you to connect with other people and allows other people to connect with you, I think that's why we tell stories. And I think that holding that back out of fear, you're actually not just doing yourself a disservice, but you're doing a disservice to the people that could benefit from your story. So we have to be brave.
That's great. Where can people go to buy the book, to find out more about what you're up to, that sort of thing?
The book is on Amazon. The audiobook is there as well on Audible. And I'm sort of active. Well, my EA is active on Instagram. So yeah, I'm up there.
Cool. Well, once again, the book is called Postpartum Me. Check it out. Suzanne, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chandler. It's good talking to you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps of how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.